Is having a daily possible? This question isn't as easy as it might seem.
And it's because I really think it depends on what you think a drift car is, because a Prospect Concord probably wouldn't make a good daily car, and what your typical daily is. If we can agree that my E36 is a drift car, it is probably a little bit better to being a daily car than, I don't know, the E46 turbo that Camil had. Not an expert, didn't do too much drifting yet, but after buying the E36, the first little test went to the ditch. Something bad was happening with the car, so if I had to go somewhere far the next day, probably wouldn't make it if it was my only car. Of course, you can be careful while driving. You can, drift it sometimes in a controlled environment on the street. Yeah, if you treat, linking two corners as drifting, that's probably easier to, treat it as a car that you can daily and you can drift sometimes. But if you're planning on going to events where anything can happen, you can have a big crash, and if it's your only car, the next day is pretty rough probably. So I always was a big fan of this idea to have a car that can do both drifting and you can get into and go to buy some groceries. Bumble always laughed at me when I said so, because we have two different visions. He's more into pro drifting. I'm more interested in grassroots type of events. The drift car is something else for me than it is for him, most probably. But it doesn't really matter, because if there's drifting, there's also bad stuff that can happen with it. So you can crash a car, it can have a problem, whatever. So what I think now is that yes, drift car can be a daily, but a certain type of drift car, and it can be a daily if you have another car that is your daily. You can daily a drift car, but if it breaks, you gotta have other car to save your ass. And when I mentioned that I haven't done too much driving yet, I'm gonna change it this year. So I have been prepping a little, prepping the car and prepping myself for the hopefully events that we're gonna go to. So here's what I've been up to.
So here we have the latest purchases, straight from Japan, almost, and straight from Poland. So obviously I need a helmet, so I bought one, almost the cheapest one, and some FED Sports gloves from Japan, because I always like them. Yeah, let's get that aside. Here are some wheels that I also bought. These work wheels, XT7s. And some Advance ABS's model T7. Those are not the prettiest, but I'm gonna refresh them, or maybe I won't, because they match the beat up car. We'll see.